Pope Joan by Caroline Duffy. After I learned to transubstantiate unleavened bread into the sacred host and swung the burning frankincense till blue-green snakes of smoke coiled around the hem of my robe, and swayed through those fervid crowds high up in papal chair, blessing and blessing the air, nearer to heaven than cardinals, archbishops, bishops, priests, being vicar of Rome. Having made the Vatican my home, like the best of men, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti Amen, but twice as virtuous as them, I came to believe that I did not believe a word. So I tell you now, daughters or brides of the Lord, that the closest I felt to the power of God was the sense of a hand lifting me, flinging me down, as my baby pushed out from between my legs, where I lay in the road in my miracle, not a man or a pope at all.
So first we'll go through Soapstone. So the speaker is Pope Joan. The occasion is that she is giving birth. The audience is women who belong to the Catholic Church or female followers of the Church. The purpose is to show the outdated practices and views and the sexism within the Catholic Church. The subject, obviously, is Pope Joan, and the tone is proud but critical. And then the structure of the poem is stanzaic free verse with 3 lines in each stanza, and it's one long enjambment until the end of the poem. And then the title is literal because it's about the subject, but it's also an allusion to Joan of Arc because she was another woman who had to hide her identity as a female in order to achieve her goals. And the theme of the poem is a commentary on the Catholic Church and its outdated practices. And it's also a judgment of the view of women in the church.
Okay, so if you look at the figurative language in the first 2 stanzas, you'll notice that in the first line you have transubstantiate, and that simply means it's a practice of the Catholic Church where they change the bread and wine to the body and blood of Christ. And this definition is pretty much given to you in the second and third line. You have the unleavened bread turning into sacred host. And then in the second stanza, you have the image of burning frankincense, which is a positive image in the Catholic Church. It makes reference to the birth of Christ, which is celebrated every year at Christmas. But then you have, in the next line, you have the contrast. You have the snakes of smoke, which, first off, the S sound gives you the alliteration to make it sound like a snake. It's also making reference to original sin and how the snake made Adam and Eve eat the apple and they committed original sin, and it's showing how she's committing sin by having children because church officials in the Catholic Church are not allowed to have children. In the third stanza, you have the rhyme of chair and air, and the whole stanza is basically a critique of the Catholic Church. It's showing how she's high up in the papal chair, where she is supposed to be blessing the people beneath her as she's being carried around, but she feels that this is just going over the people's heads and they aren't really understanding what's going on. The blessings are simply going into the air and not into the people. And then in the fourth stanza, you have how she's near to heaven, and this is a double enjambment because she is literally near to heaven since she's high up in a papal chair. But it's also showing that she has the closest relationship to God of anyone living on earth currently. And then in the next line, you have basically the hierarchy of the officials in the Catholic Church descending in importance from cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and priests. And then finally her being the vicar of Rome, which is the highest position there is. In the fifth stanza, you have Pope Joan saying how she's made the Vatican her home and she's living in the papal apartments. And even though she's living somewhere where only men have lived in the past, she's not letting that stop her. In the last line of this stanza, it's making reference to the Trinity, and it's showing how this is a common theme throughout the entire poem, since each stanza is 3 lines. And it's in Latin because the Catholic Mass was conducted in Latin from the onset of the Catholic Church until 1967. and where it was then conducted in vernacular languages. In the sixth stanza, she's saying how she's twice as virtuous as them. So even though she's living in this role where it's male dominated, she's more than qualified than most of the people that have come before her. But she still says that she cannot believe a word because she, even though she is overqualified, she is still rejected by one major tenet of the church. In the seventh stanza, Joan is addressing her audience directly for the first time, which is the woman who belonged to the Catholic Church, and she's conveying her message that the closest that she felt to the power of God was this sense of a hand lifting her and then flinging her down. And this lifting her and flinging her down is repeated again in the ninth stanza, but it has many meanings as to what it could be. It can show that her conflicting views of the Catholic Church, that she believes it's a really good institution, but there's still some things that they need to address and fix to make it more accessible for all people. It also shows her conflicting views on having a kid, since she's overjoyed to be having this child, but since it's going to mean that she's getting kicked out of the church, it's there's pluses and minuses to both. It could also be imagery showing her contractions while giving birth. In the final stanza, where Joan is laying in the road, it's showing that she is abandoned, she's lost or just dropped off, and she's not really supposed to be there. She was not wanted anymore, so she was just left on the side. But she's also okay with that. She's still overjoyed that she has this miracle as a kid. She's saying that having a kid is a miracle, but it's also making reference to the second stanza and how when Mary had a kid, that was a miracle as well. And the last sentence of the entire poem is showing a loss of identity, not necessarily for herself, but for everybody around her, because they now realize that she is not who she said she was. She is not a man or a pope at all, but to her, she's known this the entire time, and she still has her faith, and she now has a kid, and so she is content knowing that she no longer has to pretend to be something that she's not.